For as long as I can remember, I've been interested in technology, and while graphics cards have always been my first love, I distinctly remember lusting after certain processors. AMD's Athlon 64 is one such example, as well as Intel's Core 2. But over the past few years, the CPU market has changed significantly, and I, in this video, want to discuss some upcoming processors and AMD and Intel's strategy and how they diverge, plus as well Zen 3 on 12nm, which I'm sure you'll agree is kind of interesting. With that said, let's talk for a moment about this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is all you need to build your website and help make it a success. Their all-in-one platform is everything from website design to marketing tools and analytics, and Squarespace is the place to make your dream website a reality. So in this video then, I want to discuss more about AMD's decisions for AM5, such as it being PCIe 4 only, how Intel wants to flex its tech might, and 12nm Zen 3, plus some other cool stuff. We've talked about the increased core counts, particularly in mainstream, a billion times at this point, as well as other supporting technologies which make all of this possible, such as chiplets. But there are also a number of other underlying technologies which are just as interesting. The move to DDR5 memory is going to vastly increase the amount of bandwidth available in mainstream as well as high performance segments, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment as it's very integral to the video. Plus other technologies such as the Big.LITTLE adoption from Intel and AMD. Well, technically speaking, heterogeneous is the right term. Now, while AMD and Intel are of course in competition with one another, and at the end of the day Intel lust to be on top again, they are not as mad about it as possibly you might think compared to other potential scenarios which could happen in the future. The most obvious is the adoption of ARM, along with competing architectures such as Apple's M1. Now that's a video in and of itself, but believe me, considering how difficult it would be for Intel to convince the market to move back from, say, ARM to x86, they are more than happy for AMD to just kind of run with the flag for now and then try to grab those customers back. It would be considerably easier for them to grab x86 customers back from AMD compared to grabbing, let's say, M1 customers back from Apple. It's worthy to note about Windows 11 that it specifically improves ARM support in its operating system, as Windows branches out to change how developers can target applications. Slightly off topic, but the requirements also nuke x86 as the minimum, now requiring the usage of x64. Keeping on the Windows 11 subject for a second longer, the changes over Windows 10 have already shown improvements in performance in link field by several percent. And this will surely translate well to future hybrid processors from both Intel and AMD. But those are conversations for another time. And I do think a bit of world building, so to speak, is important here. Intel's 14nm woes made processors such as Rocket Lake a necessity, which of course essentially was a backport of a 10nm design, albeit with some changes onto 14nm. By the way, we didn't exclusively leak the fact that Intel would be doing this with Rocket Lake, that it was actually a backport. Now, you can make an argument that Intel did actually learn a lot from this backporting process, and we know thanks to public roadmaps which Intel have released themselves that they'll be doing a lot more backporting in the future. I don't want to retread over old ground too much here, as we've covered it extensively in the past, but I do think that Intel offering itself as a fab for other companies could benefit from this backporting experience. Intel is very aware that the public perception is that AMD have just been ahead of them in critical technology. Not just because of PCIe Gen 4 and chiplets, but just in general. The perception is there that AMD are ahead of Intel, and of course this has only been further worsened by the, well, let's say issues with Intel's process technology. So with that said, Alder Lake, according to one of my sources, is kind of, well, show that Intel is a tech pioneer again, to show that it can support the latest and greatest technology. One of the early rumours that I was hearing regarding Zen 4 and AM5 is that it would support PCIe Gen 5. And this no longer seems to be the case. I'm now hearing from multiple sources that it's only going to be Gen 4 for AM5, whereas, well, Intel don't seem to be doing that with their LGA 1700 socket. Alder Lake not only supports DDR5 memory, but also PCIe Gen 5 as well. And the reason behind this? Well, one of the main ones is simply because Intel want to show itself as a tech pioneer again. Predominantly, AMD does not believe that PCIe Gen 5 in the AM5 platform is worth their time and effort. Of course, there are niche usages for it, but in the market right now, it doesn't make sense in the short term. All of this means that AMD have decided that the difficulties and complexities and costs of implementing PCIe Gen 5 is not worth it for the AM5 platform. And of course, this is now left down to Intel. Now, there are definitely some times that PCIe Gen 5 could be useful, certainly in the mobile market if you want to use fewer PCIe lanes, or perhaps in niche network scenarios. Now, I know server is a completely different thing, but I'm talking from the home perspective here. But yeah, it's quite interesting. And as an aside, it makes me wonder also what AMD may be planning for the Threadripper platform, especially because we've kind of seen a bifurcation of Threadripper anyway. It makes me wonder if certain models are only going to support Gen 4 and others Gen 5, given we know, of course, the server market from AMD will be PCIe Gen 5. By the way, this is just speculation on my part. I'm not familiar with AMD's Threadripper plans, at least, well, yet anyway. But let's just take one more moment to talk about this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Designing your dream website doesn't have to be complicated. With a huge range of fully customizable templates and themes to choose from, Squarespace's versatile tools make it simple and easy to create your dream website. Select your starting template from a large library of themes, all designed around different categories of website. From here, you can make your website truly your own and customize it as much or as little as you would like. Their platform isn't just website design tools, however, including giving you expert advice on hand if you need it, as well as providing assets for SEO, social media integration, as well as email campaigns. So let's say you're building your first portfolio and wish to sell art, or perhaps you're building an online resume, a store. Squarespace is everything you need to get your name out there. You can also save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain with the code REDGAMINGTECH. Just use the link which is available in the video description. Switching, from PCIe Gen 5, let's talk about DDR5. Now, this one again is something that AMD will also be supporting, but there's a key difference, and that is the release timing of the platforms, which we'll get into in just a second. Basically, Intel are going to be acting as kind of the guinea pigs here with Alder Lake, because Alder Lake launches in Q4 of this year. Now, the reason this is so interesting is because we're already seeing so many reports that not only is it going to be rather expensive, that is DDR5, but also latencies are not ideal. If you've been around the block a time or two, you'll know that this is par for the course when we saw DDR4 as well as its other predecessors become adopted into the mainstream. And it's way too early right now to really know what the availability, pricing of DDR5 will be, let alone how many good memory kits there would actually be for something like gaming. And of course there are other questions too, which quite frankly I don't know the answer to, such as how sensitive Alder Lake is to things such as memory bandwidth and timings. Alder Lake is going to launch in Q4, which I just mentioned a moment ago, and let's face it, at this point Q4 is a well-established launch date. AM5 though launches considerably later. Think the middle of next year. I was told late Q2 to early Q3 by 3 different sources as its range. The core count though for Zen 4 Ryzen is almost certainly to be the same core count as what we have now, 16 cores for the highest end SKU. And also, like I've mentioned in previous videos, even late last year, AMD had considered increasing the core count for Zen 4, but they felt that they didn't need to do so to be competitive. I was told back then that the core counts had been considered up to 24 cores, which of course would easily be fed by dual channel DDR5 memory. But yeah, AMD are not going to push higher core counts yet and will not do so most likely until Zen 5. So as you've guessed, a part of this reason then for this later launch in mid-2022 is partly due to DDR5's memory constraints. And so we've seen the kind of interim solution from AMD, which is the Ryzen V-Cache solution. AMD have already shown this off officially. The Zen 3 silicon here hasn't really changed versus the older Zen 3 CCX. There's no big changes in, let's say, branch prediction, no instructions, for example, a waffle iron instruction. Indeed, rather amusingly, we even saw evidence of through silicon vias which are actually present even in Vermeer. So AMD have just done, well, AMD things, and plonked, technical term, a large amount of cache directly onto the chip. Again, we've discussed this heavily in the past, and this video is already getting kind of long, but the TLDR here is that performance has increased considerably for games, as has shown by AMD in various benchmarks. Oh, and I've mentioned this in a few videos already, but I'm fairly certain that this is not Warhol, judging by numerous conversations I've had with different folks. I do believe Warhol was a real product, but I don't know how far it got in the planning stages. I believe that Ryzen V-Cache here is its own unique product, though AMD has not revealed Milan X, which you can think of as much the same product, albeit scaled up for server core counts. Back to Warhol though, I'm afraid it's probably going to remain a mystery. I'm hearing a lot of things conflicting regarding Warhol, but my guess is that Ryzen V-Cache is not the same thing as Warhol. Speaking to two sources familiar with this, it is going to be on the AM4 platform, but AMD has not fully briefed its partners yet on its plans for older boards, but it is generally thought to work on older 500 series boards. But I wouldn't be so hopeful if you have, let's say, a B450. Again though, AMD have not confirmed this to their board partners yet. Ian Cuttress from Anantech confirmed that the chip will enter production later this year, and so it's been widely speculated the launch is going to be early next year. But one of my sources has told me that this is probably incorrect, and AMD is hoping to launch late Q4. Raphael, also known as Ryzen using Zen 4 then, if you look at the release date, you might say to yourself, well gee, isn't it launching a bit late for Alder Lake? And you would be 100% correct. And because of that, you could probably guess that Zen 4 is not really designed as a part to compete against Alder Lake, but instead it's designed to compete against Raptor Lake. I guess you could also look at this as kind of a vice versa thing, that Intel are timing their processor to launch and then compete with Zen 4. Either way, yeah, Raptor Lake is going to be a very impressive architecture. To my understanding, it will launch in Q3. I've now confirmed this with a couple of Intel's partners, and core counts will increase as well. So while the socket is going to be identical, Raptor Lake is going to increase its core count over Alder Lake, so it's going to have 8/16 cores. This is according to two separate sources. We've also seen a number of leaks for Raptor Lake already from websites such as Video Cards, which detail some of the improvements we're going to see in the architecture. It's still way too early, according to several of my sources at this point, as to which one is going to come out on top, particularly when you start to consider just different workloads. Like, it's never just as easy as to say X amount of IPC, because that is never in a vacuum, right? It's like, what workload? How many threads are we talking about? Yada, yada, yada. And in games, it becomes even more complicated, because then you start to wonder, well, what resolution are you testing? And there's a whole argument, of course, of whether you should test games at 720p, which I'm going to leave you to argue about in the comments below. But yeah, continuing with the discussion a little more, I also want to say that a number of people have been talking about Zen 4D. And these are what you can consider to be the little cores from the Zen 5 processor products. Now, as you can probably guess from the name, they are basically Zen 4 derived little cores. And I don't really know what the differences are between Zen 4 and Zen 4D as of the time that I'm recording this anyway. I'll figure it out soon enough, I'm sure, and I'll put out a video. But as you can probably imagine, they're basically just optimized around lower power. But there has been a lot of reports that these are most likely going to launch possibly early 2023, and I'm hearing that this is almost certainly not the case. Most likely this is a product that really I would not get even slightly excited about, Zen 4D, as it's not going to come to market until late 2023, and I'm hearing that's best case scenario. In fact, I'm hearing much more likely it's going to be mid 2024. So again, it's cool, it sounds awesome, but this is not a product which is going to launch tomorrow or anything like that. And I did lead with this video talking about Zen 3 on a 12nm process. Like, what the hell is that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about Monet, shall we? Monet is an ultra low power chip designed to replace the likes of Athlon. And from my understanding, it's 4 Zen 3 cores, a couple of RDNA 2 WPGs, and because it is actually the Navi 2X IP, it does support ray tracing technically, but yeah, I don't think you're going to want to try and run ray tracing on this thing. And yeah, the odd thing about this, as you have probably guessed by now, is that it's actually being manufactured on an older manufacturing process. How old? Well, it's using GlobalFoundries 12LP+. Now, if you need a moment to recover or scream in the comments, because that does help our engagement, feel free. And as we all know, this would be a very interesting challenge as well as decision by AMD. I don't know whether this is true, however, one of the sources who told me this initially has a really good track record, and furthermore, I did some digging, and another one of my sources who again has a pretty decent track record then told me that they believe that this is true. So I would take it with a reasonable level of certainty that, you know, Monet is a real product. Either way, however, the 12LP Plus process from Glowflow is a pretty decent process. It's not as good as the latest or greatest from TSMC, and you can probably yourself already guess some of the cuts that are going to need to be made for this chip. The most obvious is L3 cache, which takes up a ridiculous amount of the die space for, let's say, a Zen 2 or Zen 3 CCX. So I believe that this product is going to be severely cut down. This is not a product which is going to find its way in high-performance laptops or anything like that. This is going to be in kind of integrated systems. This is going to be in ultra-low power, you know, notebooks. It's going to be a cheap and cheerful kind of solution. Think of this, you know, kind of like ATMs or like integrated displays, that type of thing. Again, this is kind of like a mass-produced product which needs to be as cheap to create as possible, and therefore it also doesn't need to be running at ultra-high clock frequencies. Basically, to my understanding, it could be also a bit like DALI, so it could be a successor to DALI as well. The general feeling I'm getting from Intel right now and their partners is that their product roadmap is actually fairly good. And while their 10nm process has become a bit of a meme, 7nm as well as the products which are on it are possibly shaping up to be really good. The question a lot of people have at this point isn't necessarily whether the products are good on paper, it's whether Intel can execute. And I've actually heard some rumors that the 7nm process could be a problem. In fact, one person told me that it could be as bad of a, you know, a bad of a deal, let's say, as their 10nm process. However, at the moment, I'm willing to give Intel the benefit of the doubt. You know, we've seen Pat Gelsinger quite, well, you know, quite confident about their 7nm process. But at the end of the day, though, whether we're talking about 10nm, whether we're talking about 7nm, whether it's Alder Lake, whether it's a future architecture, it doesn't really matter. Intel just need to release products which are actually going to impress us. And it's quite interesting now because, you know, from a couple of people at Intel, there was definitely a sense that they knew this last, you know, couple of years, this last 2-3 years is going to suck. That they're just going to get absolutely kicked in the shin constantly by the press, constantly by tech fans, because there just wasn't, you know, much they could do about it. It's like, I'm not saying that the 10900K, for example, was a bad product. It wasn't. It's a decent product in and of itself. The problem is you're not comparing it, you know, against nothing. And AMD's products like the 3950X, for example, and now, of course, you've got the 5950X, they are just incredible because AMD are just relentlessly executing. So there's definitely a sense at Intel that they really really need to just get that act together. And AMD are, I know it's a meme at this point, but they are just being relentless with the execution of their different products. And I find Monet in particularly interesting because it just shows that they are extremely agile when it comes to not only the customization of their silicon, but just being able to provide things for customers so readily and so easily. I think it's also very telling that Alder Lake is being seen by Intel as kind of like this product which is meant to act as like a PR piece for them to show that they are capable of creating leading bleeding edge technology. I'm going to be very interested to see how all of this fares, to be honest with you. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments down below. And are you interested at all in getting Ryzen Vcache? Are you just going to wait and get Zen 4, or are you just going to kind of hold fire to see how AMD and Intel end up, you know, in the fight and then get whichever one? With that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.